All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Mary Olson at Airlie Winery. It's July 16th, 2019. Mary, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Why wine?
Why not? I always liked wine, and I liked going to the wineries, visiting wineries, and so why not wine?
How did you talk about developing your interest? Was there a particular part of your life that was like when you started drinking wine or started getting interested in it?
Well, I didn't grow up around alcohol at all. Not that my parents were actually against it. My dad did make rhubarb wine that was absolutely awful. And there would be no reason to drink wine at our house. But as I got older, I liked going out for dinner and having a glass of wine. And so all my working career before this career, I would have a lot of dinners that I'd have to go to, and so wine was always part of it. And at one point I was transferred to Oregon, and that's when I fell in love with the wine industry, because I'd go out on the weekends to visit wineries when friends came to visit. It was great fun, and it was kind of in the early days of Oregon in the about 1990, and so all the wineries were pretty small. You usually got to talk to somebody who actually was making it, or at least was familiar on how it was made, and it was just kind of a fun experience. So that's why wine.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing before wine, before you got into this career.
Well, after I graduated from college, I went to work for the telephone company, Northwestern Bell at the time. I grew up in Wisconsin. I went to school in Minnesota. And I was hired in 1974, and at that time I didn't know there was a recession going on, because we weren't paying much attention to recessions. We were too busy marching and protesting and doing other things college kids were doing in the early 70s. And but I got hired on with the telephone company in their management development program, and so I had a nice 22-year career with Northwestern Bell and then U.S. West when the Bell system broke up. And at one point I was transferred to Oregon. And so I was transferred all over. That meant eating out a lot, because I was on the road at the end of my career there, on the road 4 or 5 days a week sometimes. But wine was always the kind of thing that kind of made everything all right. That just a glass of wine at the end of the day was always a nice thing to have with the meal. So when I got transferred to Oregon, I just fell in love with this state. This is the best state in the whole United States, and I've seen a lot of them. And but this is Minnesota friendly without the bad weather. It's great. It has the best food sources here. I mean, everything's so fresh, and the wines were just delicious. It was kind of the first time that I was exposed to Pinot Noir, because it wasn't kind of on the regular menus in many of the restaurants that I went to, and but I was kind of exposed to Pinot Noir and fell in love with that lovely red grape that can be so fickle at times. So anyway, that's kind of what I did at the telephone company. At the end, I was a corporate officer, and I like to tell people in the tasting room, they finally promoted me high enough, they found out they liked me better from afar. And so here I am.
It's a good way to put it. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
It took me a long time to come up with that phrase, but it's a good one.
You talked about kind of falling in love with the Oregon wine industry here. Tell me about your kind of initial impressions of the wine industry as you started to kind of learn about it here.
Everybody you went out and talked to was excited about what they were doing, and so they and more than willing to share what they were doing. And most of the wineries were very small at the time, and so it was just exciting to talk to people that were that excited about what they were doing, and it looked like it was a pretty cool lifestyle. I didn't fool myself into thinking that it was easy, because I grew up in Wisconsin in dairy country. All my uncles were dairy farmers. I actually grew up in a small town, but all my uncles were dairy farmers, so I kind of knew a little bit about farming, and I knew that you had to be willing to just fix fences and fix tractors, and if you had to call somebody every time something broke, you were going to go broke. And so I kind of knew a little bit about farming, but not a lot about wine, other than I drank it. But it just did impress me as just a cool thing to do. And so I started when I was transferred to Oregon in 1990. I spent 2 years here as the general manager for the telephone company and traveled the state. And like I said, on weekends I'd like to go out to the wineries if I had a weekend to spend. But I just fell in love with the state and the wine industry, and I so jokingly started telling my friends in my next life I was going to buy a winery and move back to Oregon. And so I didn't know my next life was going to come along that soon, but it came along in 1996. And I came out here for harvest to help. I'd actually been out here on vacation looking at various properties. At that time, I didn't know that everything was for sale. Now I know. But anyway, it didn't appear that there was much for sale, and there might not have been at that time. So I was actually looking at bare ground and thought, well, maybe I'll have to plant grapes and wait 5 years and blah 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 blah. But the realtor I was dealing with said, well, you know, there's this couple that they talk about retiring, and it's about the size that you're talking about. Big enough to have a winemaker, but small enough not to be big. And because I'd been there, done that. And so we came out and talked to Larry and Alice Preedy, who owned the winery before me. And I came and helped them with the first harvest, my first harvest in 1996. And then I bought it in January of 1997. So Larry always said to me, because the harvest of 96 was wet and cold. That was a wet, cold harvest. He said, if you like this, you're really going to like it when you get to pick grapes when it's not raining. So anyway, I've been here since January of 1997.
Tell me about that first harvest experience. I mean, besides being wet, what was it like doing that for the first time?
It was kind of a rush of adrenaline all the time. I was actually commuting from Portland because I was staying with a friend's mother who needed help. So I would get up early in the morning, but I was used to working 12-hour days anyway. It was just different type of work. I would get in my little red car and I'd drive down here and usually be here around 7 o'clock or 7:30, and they had me doing everything that involved a hose, and I was free. So anyway, so I cleaned a lot of tanks. I cleaned the press. We did everything with cold water back then, and I asked Larry later when my first winemaker was hired, and she goes, "Why are we washing everything with cold water instead of using the karsher?" And I said, "I don't know. That's what we did." And anyway, I asked Larry, and he said, "Well, it's cheaper." And we had you to do it, so
even cheaper still.
Even cheaper still. So the first harvest, it was a little. I mean, I walked down to the vineyard. I did take some grape samples. I hope they didn't actually use them. I didn't know a lot of what I was doing at that time. I could tell the white grapes from the red grapes, but that was about it. But so that first, I was really just a harvest rat, but it's still, I always did like physical labor, so it was still fun, and it was out. And the best part at that time, they were doing pump overs for the Pinot in great big tanks, and we've since changed all that. But sitting up on top of that tank and just smelling the wine, okay, as it was progressing through, was pretty cool. The most frightening part was sitting up on top of the tank on a hot day when all the hornets were. And I used to be afraid of hornets, but I'm not anymore. You just have to get over it. If you don't bother them, they usually don't bother you. So you just kind of carry on with your work. But I was here for, I would say, 3 weeks. It was a good 3 weeks during harvest, and I did enjoy it. I did enjoy it.
What made you decide this was the place you wanted to purchase?
You know, that I didn't, to be honest, I didn't put a lot of thought into it. There wasn't a lot available. It was about the right size. I tasted their wines, and I tasted a lot worse, and so I thought it had good potential in terms of winemaking and the grapes, and I get to live here. I mean, I still think this is just I still grin every morning when I get up and I get to live here, and so. So part of it was size, part of it was location. I liked the area around here, and I've grown to really like the area around here. It was a little isolated, which was a little concerning. That there wasn't a lot of wineries around. Yola Hills up on 99, and Tyee south of Corvallis, and me, and that was it. And so the closest wineries, good 25 miles away. But that's all changed too since the 90s. Yeah.
Tell me about, as you kind of got to know this place, what makes it special? What is it about this particular place that appeals to you?
I think, well, part of it appeals to me from a grape grower, and part of it just frustrates me as an owner. We have what I call the Newport Corridor. And so everybody's heard of the Van Duzer Corridor. Well, there's a Newport Corridor too. And it comes, so we get evening winds. So I would say probably 3 out of 4 nights have a pretty good breeze here, which is kind of nice when it's warm, but it can be frustrating if you just want to sit outside and read a book, and not have wind on you constantly. So, but I like that for the grapes. This is a little bit cooler site. It was perhaps too cool in the beginning. But that has all changed much too rapidly in my estimation. It's kind of scary, but the weather changes have actually benefited this site because it's become a warmer site. But it still is cool in comparison to a lot of the sites around here, and I think that's due to the Newport Corridor, kind of where we're located. So I think that's one of the things that makes it special. I think one of the things that makes it special is it is a little isolated. I think when people come up the driveway and they get up here and they look and they see it, they go, wow, we had no idea that this was going to be up here. So that the little bit of the isolation and the peacefulness, I mean, when you can sit outside and look at the stars and no Minnesota mosquitoes around, it's just delightful.
Tell me a little bit about the history of Airlie before you purchased it. You mentioned the people you bought it from. Tell me a little bit about when it was planted and kind of its history before you.
Sure. Larry and Alice Preedy owned Airlie Winery. Well, they actually owned the land, and they actually had Christmas trees on it. They were Kansas wheat farmers that came up to Oregon, and they planted Christmas. He did a lot of different things before they bought this land, but they planted Christmas trees. And it's my understanding in the early 80s, the Christmas tree market took a dip, just like all farming has its ebbs and flows. And the grapes were just kind of starting to take off. So in 1983, they decided to plant grapes. And so customers still remember, not too many of them anymore, but still remember, the winery opened in 86. Customers still remembered that if you bought a case of wine, you could go cut down a Christmas tree. As one of their promotions back in the early 80s. So that because they planted it in sections as they harvested the trees. Okay. And so as they harvested the trees, they would plant grapes. They did most of the work themselves with their daughter Jennifer. And so they started planting in 83 and finished about in 91 in terms of the 30 acres of grapes.
So when you became the owner, what was it? What kind of skills did you find you needed to have? What kind of things did you have to learn to kind of run this place?
The really great thing about the Oregon wine industry is the grape grower group. And I don't attend it very often anymore in Salem, but you could go every month and talk to grape growers free. No dues, no nothing. just hang out with grape growers and they'll tell you anything. And Larry had given me a piece of advice. He said, if you want to know anything, just ask. And then you'll get 3 or 4 or 5 different opinions, and then you'll have to make up your mind what you're going to do. But the grape growers themselves are, from a vineyard standpoint, are really generous with their time, and will help almost anybody with anything. It's a close-knit group. One of the things I had to learn was. I had all of Larry's records, so the first year I just followed his spray schedule and did exactly what he did the year before, kind of, but then over the years you kind of educate yourself in terms of what you wanted to do, and it was early on that I decided to join the live program, and I think that's made a difference in the wine and in the vineyard as well. But it sure makes a difference in my heart. It just feels like the right thing to do, to be paying attention to how you treat the earth, how you treat your employees, and how you treat your customers. Those are my three things that I always try to pay attention to. So the farming itself, I was pretty clever in terms of trying to figure out how to fix tractors and how to fix various things without having to call somebody every time something broke, because things are going to break. And so that I always had kind of an instinct on how to fix things. So that was helpful. A big thing was finding a mobile mechanic. That's still a big thing in our industry. There's not enough people that know how to fix things, and there's not enough of them that are mobile. and so learning who to call. I've always been willing to admit I don't know something and to go ask. So asking is not a problem. Albany's a very handy community because there's almost any kind of craft. And lots of skilled people in Albany, and so I would be standing down at my tractor shed and call somebody, and I said, if you had a bad starter on your John Deere 2365, where would you put these 2 things to test to see if it's the starter? And the guy would laugh on the phone and he said, that's a very good question and it's very simple. And so then you find out what the problem is and that it indeed needs replacement, but then you find out that you're in a male industry where they would happen to put the starter where you'd have to take off the front end loader in order to get it off, according to John Deere. And I'm sitting there going, there is no way I'm taking off the whole front end. So you learn how to bend wrenches and talk to neighbors and how to get screws out of bad spots. And I've often said that if women had been in farming in a big way a long time ago, it would be a lot easier. Because we would never put up with this for this long. And it has gotten easier, but there are some foolish things that you just sit there and say, really? Who thought of that? But in terms of the winemaking, the best decision I ever made was to understand I didn't know how to make wine and didn't pretend I did. I think that's a big mistake that people can make because they think, how hard can it be? And it's harder than you think. Because it's that art and science. So I hired a winemaker, and I was very fortunate both times I've had to hire a winemaker. I know a little bit more about hiring winemakers now than I did back then. So the first time I was extremely lucky because I had no idea. I interviewed people and talked to them, and I hired Susie Gagne as my first winemaker, and partially because she had a degree from UC Davis, so I thought she probably is educated in how to make wine. She was excited about how to make wine, and she was working for somewhere where she was not really allowed to make much of the decisions, but she was happy working with them. But she was really excited to come, and she unfortunately died of a brain aneurysm at a young age. So that was another big life lesson: is do what you love, because you don't know that tomorrow might never come. And she did what she loved, and and it showed. But so the first time I was lucky. Susie just kind of came into my life. The second time I wasn't. It was a little bit more skill, because of the coolness of our industry. When Susie died, after she'd been with me for 8 years, other wineries just sent help, because they knew I had wine in take and in barrels, and I wasn't the winemaker. And so I'd get calls, and they'd say, "We're sending somebody for the week. Just they'll take a look at what you got and top the barrels and check all the wines." And they helped with bottling. And Elizabeth was one of those people that Myron sent Elizabeth to help. And Elizabeth and Darcy showed up a couple times. And after I kind of got over the initial shock that I really had to do something, I called up Myron and I said, "Okay, Myron, if you were going to hire a winemaker right now, who would you hire?" And he only had one question for me. He said, "What did you pay Susie?" And I told him, and Elizabeth has been with me ever since. And that was perfect. I mean, it really has turned out to be perfect. I think a big part of learning for me has to know what you don't know, and be willing to learn. There is never enough learning, and I have now been in the industry almost 22 years, and it cycles through. I mean, I've seen fads come and go. Okay, pump over, don't pump over, do this, do that. But the reading and the literature, it's just an endless quest, which is one of the things I like the most, is that there is never an end to what you might be able to do to make just a little bit better wine. And that's the fun part of it. Yeah.
Like that. When you started here and you started to hire people and you weren't really sure yet what you were looking for, what did you look for? What were kind of the qualifications you're looking for?
Well, in my, I'm a pretty good judge of people. And I believe that's why I was really lucky on the winemaker side, because there is a skill there that you can't necessarily learn. You have to have some innate. You can. I have learned to be a better taster, for example, so that you can get better at what you're doing. But if you really aren't very good at tasting, and you can, and somehow you just don't have the ability to smell, that would be a fatal flaw that can't be fixed in this industry. But anything else, I've always believed in people. I at the telephone company, the last job I had close to 10,000 people. And so when Susie came to work for me, and she was my first employee, I did tell her, I said, slap me if I over-supervise, because I don't mean to. That I used to have a lot of people. But what I looked for is, so I think one of the most important traits is that they have a passion about what they want to do. They have a willingness to learn. And so I shy away from people that actually already know it all, because you never do. So a big part of, I think a big part of it is, who are they as a person? Because most of the rest of it you can be, people can learn and grow and pick up on. But if they're not a very nice person, it'd be very hard. This is an industry that isn't very full of. I have not run into very many people that I think have questionable personalities in this field, which is really kind of cool. That was not true in my previous job. I mean, I was finally promoted high enough that there were people around me that I wouldn't want to trust with my mother. That in terms of they were out for themselves, and so a big part of it was looking for somebody that I thought I could work with well, because I knew that it was going to be a close working relationship no matter what, and you were going to have ups and downs. The one thing I didn't know and have a great appreciation for, the winemakers during harvest, because what a stressful time that is, and for owners and winemakers. And so it's good to have people that actually understand people, so that they can be very forgiving of that one. Really, this is what upset you. So I was looking for somebody that I thought I could work with, and I had actually hired other people. But the first person that I thought I was hiring, and that was basically the original owner had kind of recommended the person, and I didn't know anything about winemaking, so I thought, I guess this, and the person was nice enough. I am actually glad that I ended up with Susie, and really glad I ended up with Elizabeth following her, because they pushed me to make better wine, okay? And so the other thing I was looking for as I got more experienced is winemakers are willing to work with almost anything that you give them, because they're kind of, they'd almost rather buy a new barrel than have a raise in their salary. Sometimes they're that kind of passion about what they do. But sometimes you need to be told you need a new barrel, okay? Or you need a new piece of equipment, because this will really help make better wine. And so I was also looking for people that would push me to make the right decisions in terms of what you spend money on. My philosophy always has been, and I can remember Elizabeth asking this question once. There was some piece of equipment that would save her a lot of time. And I said, do you need time? And she goes, well, not really when I'm doing that. And I said, well, then let's spend it on making better wine. If there's a piece of equipment that'll make better wine. Or if you need more time, that's fine too. But if we don't need more time at that particular time of the year, let's not spend our money saving us time. Let's spend our money making better wine. So you want somebody who can push you to make, because Elizabeth doesn't really have to ask unless she's buying a press or something. She can buy what she wants. And I appreciate that she's as frugal with my money as I am. And I'm from Wisconsin. There was a reason I could buy a winery. I never spent a dime.
I like that. Tell me about, sort of as you got into the business here, how you developed sort of strategies for selling your wine. You talk about being kind of isolated here. How did you go about selling wine? How did you kind of find that place?
I love it. So the tasting room, over the years, it's interesting to actually take a look at what we do here. We could do better at selling wine, and that's all on me. I love the tasting room, and I love the customer interaction, and I still do. You meet the most fascinating people coming through the countryside, and I can almost guarantee that any person who's been through this winery and tasted Elizabeth's wine, and then will come back, because this is not a stop along the way. It's a place to sit and stay. And people bring their dogs, they bring their kids. I've seen several generations now through, and their family. When Susie died, my customers were unbelievable. I mean, they just kept on coming, and they always have been. So as isolated as we are busy. And so this tasting room is a real busy tasting room. And I always think it's due to two things. I maybe will have you edit this later, but I'm kind of charming.
I think we can probably leave that. We're probably okay.
Yeah. And I am genuinely interested in them. And for anybody else who's ever worked the tasting room with me, I said, always know more about your customers than they know about you at first, because they will open up. Okay, and so I have people that come back over and over and over again and bring more people over and over and over again. So even though it's out of the way, this tasting room is very busy on the weekends. Well, very busy is a relative term for where we're located, but we do a pretty nice business, and it has increased a lot. I used to always want to cover Susie's salary with the tasting room if I could, and that's, I'm well beyond that. It has really grown over the years. The difficult part of selling is distribution. It's not as much fun for me, and so it shows on how much time I actually spend on it. And it's hard to find distributors for small wineries. There's a lot of wine out there, and so we have a few small distributors that do okay, but they aren't selling tons of wine because we can't be in tons of places. But distribution is really difficult for small wineries because over the years the distributors have consolidated. They've come and gone. I went through like 4 distributors in Colorado alone, and they finally dumped me when I was still selling 800 cases a year there. I said, that's a lot for me, and they said, we were just shocked. But they were taken over by a big distributor that was just culling out small wineries, and that happens quite a bit. So the distribution end of sales is tough. I'm fortunate that the retail side of the business has continued to grow.
Talk about some of the kind of events you have here. Some of the kind of things you have to bring people to your winery.
The dog friendly is a big one. That and that we'll let them sit and have a picnic and taste outside, and we go outside and bring the wine to them. They don't have to come into the little tasting room and get their next taste of wine. And I would say dog friendly. As people ask now if they can have a wedding out here, and I go, if you like dogs. But the 27th of this month, the Irish Center Club is coming. Last year they brought 12. And customers from all over would sit up here and they would watch as they had a picnic down there, and all the Irish setters are swimming and running around the pond, and they go, this is fantastic. But so dog friendly is a big part of it. Outdoor tasting room has made a big difference to actually serve people outside, let them bring their food in, let them sit and enjoy it, and no rush. This is not an assembly line place at all. People just sit. I've had people come up from Corvallis, and which is about 20 miles, and for the first time. And I had a couple here a year or so ago, and they were watching everybody with their dogs and their picnics and stuff. And she just looked at her husband and said, "Go home and get the dog." He said, "Are you serious?" She goes, "Yeah, I'm serious. I'm going to sit here and have a glass of wine. You're going to go home and get the dog." So that's been a big one, and more people are traveling with their pets. We do some music now on Sundays. We do jazz because I looked around and said, what are my neighbors doing, my friends and neighbors? And none of them are doing jazz, so I thought, let's do it on Sunday when I'm not interfering with what they're doing on Friday and Saturday. So we do Sunday jazz in the afternoon now. We've had a camp out for years, and it started with a customer saying, when are you going to let us stay? And so the first camp out was, bring a guitar if you have one. We had just a few people sitting around. I cooked some brats, and because I'm from Wisconsin. And we had a camp out. Well, it's grown. When we had Starry Night here, we call it Starry Night. When we did the eclipse, because we happened to be under the total, we had like 275 people here. But usually we have about 160 campers, and we have music that plays until my friend the drummer's hands bleed. And then I make everybody blackberry pancakes in the morning, and so and off they go. So we try to keep it simple and comfortable. This is a non-pretentious winery with, in my estimation, and I'm fantastic wine. Okay, but there's no pretense here. If you don't know how to pronounce Pinot Gris, we're not going to ridicule you for it. We will pronounce it properly in front of you, but we will not look at you and say it's Gris. And it's worked. It's worked. We have a nice mixture of customers.
Nice. Talk about the importance of being a woman-owned and operated winery here.
I don't know that it made a huge difference in the beginning, but I think that more and more people pay some attention to that as well. And so we didn't used to really talk about it, but we now actually have it as one of the things that we talk about, women-owned and operated. And there aren't that many in terms of total ownership. There's a lot of husbands and wives. There's a lot of couple industries, but I have always been a supporter. I always try to point out one of the things we named our port style wine Nudge, because I'm always trying to nudge people to do the right thing. And I try to point out to people, I said, you have to remember that it took women and like 60 years to vote after black men. And you know how we feel about black men. We have a long ways to go. And so I've always felt that women ought to support women, and that we ought to really pay attention to the total mankind. Having spent so many years in the telephone company, and I was the first corporate officer on the technical side of the business to be a woman, and there's things that we can help people navigate through that will make their life a little easier. And so women supporting women, I think, is very important, and men supporting women, I think, is very important, and people just supporting all the people is very important. That we are in an industry that has a lot of diversity, and we ought to celebrate it. And Sebastian, for example, has been with me since '03. Guadalupe left for a moment in time and found out that Paradise was back here, so he had to wait a while to get back because he'd been replaced. But it's nice to have long-term employees that are friends, and that people that you really want to hang out with. And so I think that the women-owned and operated, I find that you do get people that kind of pay attention to that. And want to be supportive. And there's many times that support has been really nice to have.
Have you had other women coming up in the industry coming to you for pointers and advice? I
think Elizabeth has more so than I, because what do I know about making wine? And more of them are on the winemaking side than on the ownership side. So I think Elizabeth has more so than I have. And everything kind of comes and goes. We've been together so long. I mean, we went out to visit women-owned or women-operated wineries too, and have done, and kind of went down to Tyee to visit with Marilee down there, and when Penner-Ash was still under Lynn. So that kind of getting out. Some of our outings, we've kind of tried to get out to the more of the women-owned and operated. But the really cool thing is, I think all the women and men in this industry are just actually pretty fantastic. This is I think that some of the coolest people work in this industry. Period. It's from the Castiles on down. I mean, it's just a cool industry and a supportive industry.
Tell me about, speaking of the industry, some of the changes you've seen in the industry since you became part of it. In addition to just pure size, what else about Oregon wine has changed since you became part of the industry?
I think that our forefathers set up really good standards, and we've continued to try to maintain and hold them. And so one of the things I think is pleasant that I've seen in the industry is that the people that started this industry are still in the industry, and they're still participating in it. So you don't see all of them as often as you used to, but but they are still interested in participating in the industry. So, in spite of all the growth and all the new people, the people that frame the industry are still participating and helping the industry. And I think that's been fantastic. We've obviously seen big players come in, and some of them have been real supportive in terms of participating in the industry. So, in spite of their size, I mean, in spite of their size, they're on the committees. They're volunteering for different things. They will answer any of the questions you might have. Kendall Jackson has like 200 acres right over that hill. Okay, and the grower and I have sat down with dinner. So some of the things haven't really changed as we've gotten bigger. What has changed in this area is we've become closer from a marketing standpoint. One of the things that helps is my fellow wineries around here send people to me, and I send people to them. And so we're kind of our biggest supporter, and so actually getting bigger has helped. It's not hurt. It's helped to actually have more wineries around me. It isn't competition. It is a destination. It's become more of a destination. But it's not quite as intimate as it used to be. There's just so many. I mean, people come and they ask them where they've been visiting, and I have no idea where the winery even is. Because those of us who actually run the tasting rooms don't get out to visit tasting rooms. So we see them in educational sessions, but don't really know necessarily what their wineries actually look like or how they're set up. It's hard to be as close. When I first got in the industry, I was doing all the Newport Seafood Festival and all those kind of things, and you really kind of knew most of the people in the industry, and that's no longer true. I would say I probably only know maybe a third or a half, because there's so many people in the industry now.
Does it feel like the kind of, you talk about kind of the defining characteristic of Oregon wine when you came into it was all the cool people and all the willingness to share and help? Does that feel like it's still there?
I think it's still there. I think one of the things I hope is still there is that I always felt that this was an industry that would tell you the naked truth. So if I actually had a poor product, I think other wineries would tell me if they tasted it, and would let me know. And I've done that in the past, where I have actually gone out to another winery and I actually called up and said, "Do you have any idea what's going on at this tasting room?" and it wasn't in a mean-spirited thing. Just so they know, because you can't fix something that you don't know exists. And so I think this industry still is pretty sharing in terms of, I think it's essential. We should be critical of each other to each other, but never to the public. And so,
like a family.
Like a family, yeah. That I can tell you something, but if somebody came into my tasting room and said something, I would just say it must have been a bad day or something. That just isn't the case. And I think we still have that, but I think that's one of the things that actually sets us apart, because this industry rose up by everybody getting better. The wine has gotten better in Oregon. You really don't go out. And there used to be time that you'd go out and you could have a pretty bad bottle, but we have really all gotten better, and that's essential if you're going to be a little gnat in the wine industry like Oregon is. You better have a good reputation, because I don't think people are going to be streaming into Iowa anytime soon to do out-of-state wine tours, but they do come here, and they come here for the food and the wine and the beer and the spirits and just the beauty of the whole freaking place. But I think it's essential that we all are learning together and all willing to learn, because we all do better if we all do better.
And so, on that note, what do you see as you look ahead for Oregon wine? What do you see as the next decade for the Oregon wine industry?
I think the Oregon wine industry has a real bright future. I think it's always going to be hard for the smaller wineries to do anything other than the tourism end of it, because it's just difficult on the distribution side. And that could kind of change too, because I have seen over my 22 years small distributors start up and do okay and then get bought up, and so it ebbs and flows. But I think Oregon is such a beautiful state. And a big part of it is in terms of the wine industry, I think we'll always have people that want to come to Oregon and taste wine. And our own people like doing that and bringing out their people. So I think it will continue. I think the growth on small wineries will maybe subside a little bit, but the wine industry itself will continue to flourish, I think. I think it's very bright. I think that we all need to worry about what's happening with the temperatures. It actually has helped Oregon. I hate to say that because I don't think it's a good thing, period. But Oregon is more consistent than we've ever been as a result of our weather and the climate changing. And so the early 70s, there were vintages that were difficult because it never warmed up. And even when I was here in the 90s, in the early 90s with the telephone company, I can still remember I was the general manager in Oregon, and June was just wet and cold all June. And it was 1990. And I looked at my chief of staff and I said, "Does summer ever come to Oregon?" And he said, "Do you know what the difference between December and June is in Oregon?" And I said, "No." He said, "December has 31 days. I said, "Okay, I got it." We just don't have that anymore. And so, consistently. 2010, the one thing that when you're in this business, you remember weather, you remember years. 2010 was cold, but that was the last time we really had a cold summer. And it was so cold that we couldn't get our Pinot or our Chardonnay ripe here. And so we made a little sparkly, and they had to call it a day. You have to be willing to do that, because I looked and I said, I do not want to be selling this wine 3-4 years from now when we couldn't get it ripe. And so we tried to find somebody who would buy it for champagne, but we finally made our own sparkling method to champagne. Thank God we only made 200 cases, because that was a lot of work, but it was delicious. When you don't have any of the facilities, that was a lot of work, yeah. But it was delicious. So I'd laugh at customers. I'd say, "I'm selling it for $30 a bottle," and I've got about 90 into it. But you have to learn to live with farming, and not every year is going to be glorious. And so you better be good at saving for the rainy day. My Midwestern values paid off there.
Tell me about some of the changes that you've, in terms of grapes and other things here, that you've sort of implemented over the years. Elizabeth talked a little bit about some of the new varietals that you're growing here, the 7 whites.
Yep.
Tell me about kind of how the evolution of Airlie's brand, I guess.
Yeah. I always thought we'd probably be taking out some varieties, because everybody was just growing 2 or 3 maybe at the most, and we had so many here in the beginning. But it has really been nice to have the varieties. If customers can't find something they like here, they are going to have a hard time finding wine that they like. And the real fun part for me is Elizabeth makes them all so well that I don't have to worry about what they're asking to taste. It all is good. You're going to like some better than others, but it's all good. So we have done, we actually need to I need to step up my game because we need to start replanting seriously here. That we have a Geneva double hanging curtain system that is massive work. It is hard to maintain, and it takes a lot of work. And I'm lucky to have Sebastian and Guadalupe, who are familiar with it, taking care of it. But it is not going to be easy to find workers. And so, like right now, we would like to have like 4 or 5 more people in the vineyard pulling leaves, and we had them last week, but we're missing them this week because there's a better assignment for them, and I don't blame the people. And we aren't letting anybody in, so it's just difficult for small wineries. And so I'm looking at changing the trellis system, going to a more mechanizable system. As we replant, it becomes difficult because the row spacings here were so wide, so you have to rip out whole sections because you can't spray half a row and then change the... And so the planning for it is kind of difficult, but I think this site will continue to grow a lot of different varieties because it's one of the reasons why we get a lot of customers returning over and over and over again because there's something for everybody, and so so we have changed some things in the vineyard. We planted some new Pinot Noir. It was all Primard, although I still love the Primard clone. That I wouldn't ever live without it. But we planted some new Pinot Noir. We have experienced red blotch and kind of one of the earlier vineyards that actually alerted people to the fact that there was something radically wrong going on in the valley. And when I first started talking about it, everybody kind of poo-pooed it a little bit, like we just couldn't get our Chardonnay ripe. And everybody kind of, there was kind of maybe the site just, I said, no, there's just something wrong, and it looks like it has spider mites because it was kind of a goldish leaf only at the end. And Elizabeth and I could stand up and you could see the Chardonnay, and it just happened at the very end. And so that's been a real learning experience, and we still don't know enough about red blotch to know exactly if I love having OSU real close because they come out and visit, and they're very helpful, and so the bug people have been out. We don't seem to have an abundance of what would be spreading it. It appears that it came in with the vines. I suspect that I've always suspected, and it's kind of coming out in the literature now that like all of us have cancer in us, and during the stressful years of hot summers or the cold, we had that, when that 2010 kind of set the standard here in terms of that was such a cold year that that I think the grapes went through a jolt, and it kind of brought out some diseases that were there all along. So we've got some replanting to do because of red blotch. It came in with some of our new Pinot. Well, I call it new Pinot. It was planted in 08, but it's new for us. We have red blotch in the new Pinot. It wasn't the fault of the nursery. Nobody knew to test for it. So it's not a casting blame type of thing. But I think that one of the things that, from a vineyard standpoint, that worries me most is it used to be a little simpler, and with global warming and more vineyards and everything else happening around us, we have to pay a lot more attention to the science. You can't just take a stick and put it in the ground anymore and call it a day. These were all self-rooted. My vineyard was planted when I don't have phylloxera to my knowledge. I've had it tested a couple times, but I'd never do that. Okay, I think you have to pay attention in the vineyard a lot more to the science. And so that's part of the exciting part about being in this business, because it's always changing and evolving, and You just have to have the patience of a saint, because I always tell people it's lucky I'm young. but it's so the vineyard. It's going to be going through some radical changes in the next few years because we need to get on with it. And I'm kind of of the mindset right now about the only part that won't be replanted is the Gewürztraminer and the Maréchal Foch, because they're both in kind of sketchy areas for growing grapes anyway. The trees are coming up in the west. When that was logged in '02, that actually helped my vineyard, but they're now 30 feet tall, 20 feet tall, and they're going to get taller. And so the sun sets on my Gewürztraminer a little earlier than I'd want it setting on most other grapes. And the same is true of my Maréchal Foch over here, because I have the Dun Forest over there, and so it doesn't get the morning sun as early. And so you need something that's going to ripen, and so I can live with the old trellis system on a few areas, but the rest of it really needs to be updated with rootstock and plants, and so we've got our work ahead of us coming up.
So, yeah. What else are you seeing as you look ahead to Airlie and Airlie's future?
I see this as just kind of the perfect 5,000 case winery, you know. Just that you can my friends all laugh at me. They said, "Do you ever take a day off?" And I said, "Yeah, once in a while." But I don't. I can kind of do what I want most of the time, and I kind of want to be here. I traveled a lot with my previous job. I was transferred like 14 times in 22 years. I don't want to move. I like having my dogs. I think that this is a perfect place to live and eke out a living at the same time.
I like it. What advice would you have for someone who wanted to enter the Oregon wine industry today?
Do it. The Bjornsons often tell me that when they came around, I can still remember when they're from Minnesota. They came to the tasting room, and they were kind of looking at getting in the industry, and when they got here, I was excited that they were excited to get into the industry, and this is several years ago now. But they always laughed, and they said, "You were the one that just said, just do it." Life is way too short for people to be. Now, it's easier maybe for me to say that because I'm comfortable. I didn't make a massive amount of money. I left the telephone company before they got stupid. but money isn't everything, and people live their lives not paying attention to what really makes you happy, and people have way too much stuff. Only in America could we have storage sheds for people that have oversized houses. Quit buying so much stuff and start living. You'll be much happier. So if people are really interested, I'd say jump in. Because you can go do something else if you have to. But this is a great thing. I think people shouldn't hesitate, and I think people spend a lot of time waiting for their next life when they should be living this one.
I like that. That's excellent advice. Is there anything? Okay. Well, that's all the questions that we have for you today. Is there anything that we should have covered that we didn't? Anything I should have asked you that I did not?
Well, I think that's pretty good.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for your answers. And
You're welcome.
We'll let you go free here.